Let me. What did I do with the? Had to find the thing for TV. Because I had turned off the. Okay, so. Listen up. Okay, listen up. Okay, so, we've been going through on this Life of Christ and this week of, the Holy Week that started with, raising of Lazarus, the triumphal entry into the Jerusalem, and the cleansing of the temple. And then we went through in Matthew 21 and then in 22, just different times that Jesus is going around and triggering, the Jewish leaders. They going around, they ask him questions, he pokes them in the eye, gives them an answer they don't like, they plot to kill him. And it goes on and on. But two of the big things were in the parable of the tenants. He gets in there, and what he's telling them, if you remember that in 21, is that he tells them that God's going to take the field, the vineyard, away from the tenants and cast them out and give it to new tenants. He's saying, your time's up. Okay, you're out of here. And then in 22, the parable of the wedding feast, where he invites everybody, the Jews, the Jewish leaders, everybody invites to the wedding feast, the marriage of the bride to the bridegroom, and they all reject it. And so he says, you're out, sends out his people to go invite everyone along the wayside. He even said the good and the bad, because he's telling them, your time is done. I'm holding the wedding feast now for someone else. Remember, we had that character who showed up at the wedding with no wedding garment, and the king came along and cast him into outer darkness. Those that are trying to get in the kingdom or feel comfortable being in church or whatever, who don't have a relationship with the bridegroom. Yeah. So all that stuff's over. We're going to skip over a couple of things because we're in this crucifixion thing. And so today what we have is the betrayal by Judas, the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. Okay. And that's a big thing. Now, one of the handouts, the handout that says Judas betrays Jesus, this is difficult passages because it's in all four Gospels, but in the Gospels it's broken up. He gets inspired to betray Jesus. Then a little bit later on, he actually goes and does the betrayal of Jesus. And then later on, after the agony in the garden, that's when they come to arrest Jesus. And Judas identifies Jesus with a kiss. So it's really, really hard. So I made up a harmony here of the four Gospels. Is everybody familiar with the story of Judas? I mean, betraying Jesus. I mean, so it's not completely foreign. So, I got it down to where it's a little bit acceptable here. Oh, I wanted to give an example of why it's hard, is because in Matthew 26, it has in verse 6, you don't have to look it up, but it has the anointing. The woman who comes along and anoints Jesus, by pouring the oil over his head and, doing what she did. And then after that comes the betrayal. But in John, he's got the betrayal in John chapter 12, and the betrayal doesn't come until sometime later. So the gospel writers they tell their stories different ways. They order them in different ways. And so, like if we were to try to go, some of those things we were able to do all four of the Gospels, and we were able to read through them because they were maybe like 5 verses, and you just got to go to the different ones. But these are all over the place. So what I wanted to do was read read through this. So you get the flavor of the story, and then we'll move to the other page. So it starts out, Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, one of the 12. He went to the chief priests and officers of the temple guard and discussed how he might betray Jesus to them. They were delighted and agreed to give him 30 pieces of silver. Judas consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them uh, when there was no crowd around. That was one thing. The Jews wanted to make sure, well, let's do this, but make sure you do it when there's no crowd around. So the next section is, remember, I'm trying to condense down what four do. Some gospels don't mention a certain part. Some go into greater detail on a certain part. It's a really difficult passage to piece together. You're just better off if you just read one account, like if you read just Matthew. It says, during the Passover meal, Jesus, troubled in his spirit, said, truly, truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me. The disciples were saddened and began to ask, is it I, Lord? Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I give this morsel after I have dipped it. Then dipping the bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the morsel, Satan entered him. And Jesus said to him, what you are about to do, do quickly. And Judas left, and it was night. And the funny thing about this is the others don't have any clue. I don't think they heard him as well as they thought maybe they did. And so anyway, so then Jews, what we're going to do, I should have said this. We're going to cover his betrayal, but then we're going to go back to, because right after the scene with the Passover in the upper room, they all go into the garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. And then you have a whole happening there. And then while they're in the garden is when the soldiers come with Judas. He gives them the kiss, but then you have the arrest scene, and that's a whole scene in itself. So next week we'll do the garden and we'll do the arrest, but we'll cover no matter where it falls in the Gospels, we'll cover the betrayal. So later that night, Jesus went with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Judas, who knew the place, came guiding a detachment of soldiers and officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They carried torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen, stepped forward and asked, whom do you seek? They answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus replied, I am he. At his words, they drew back and fell to the ground. Whom do you seek? They said, Jesus of Nazareth. I told you that I am he. If you seek me, let these men go. So that's the thing. They come to him and he goes, see, this is what I've been saying. Jesus is never the victim. Jesus is the one who's always initiating the confrontation, kind of. They come to him. He doesn't wait for them to try to figure out who's who. He just says, who is it you seek? And he says, Jesus of Nazareth, and they fall down. You'd think that'd be a clue to them. But they get up and they go, maybe they figured that the first guy tripped and they all tripped over him or, whatever it might be. But then it happens again. He goes, now who are you looking for? And they go, Jesus of Nazareth. He goes, I already told you, that's me. But he wants to make it clear to the crowd that he wants to make it clear to the soldiers that they're just after him. So leave my buddies here alone. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man, arrest him. So Judas approached Jesus, said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus asked him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Then the soldiers, seized Jesus. Does anybody here think that they couldn't be Judas? Not after today's service, but I mean, maybe tomorrow. I mean, does anybody here think that they can't be Judas? Pardon?
Times in our lives where maybe we haven't were like.
Yeah, well, but see, Judas, even though Jesus kind of describes him as a devil earlier, he's still a follower. The funny thing is that Jesus gave him communion. Jesus washed his feet. I mean, he did all of those things. Now, we always picture Judas. I keep saying Jesus and Judas backwards. I can get me into trouble. Anyway, we always figure that it's so obvious that Judas is the guy. Like when he said, "One of you will betray me," like remember, they're all sitting on the same side of the table because we've all seen Da Vinci's painting, right? They're all on one side of the table. But do you think that as soon as he said that, all the other disciples went and looked towards Judas? They gotcha. They don't realize who Judas is until afterwards. The passage, as I talked about in Matthew 26 at the anointing of Jesus, it says that the disciples objected to the using of the oil instead of giving the money to the poor. Doesn't say Judas. John, because John's writing later, and John says it's Judas who said that. But I don't think it was obvious to them. That's why they were able to say, "Is it me?" So, I mean, just figure if you're being confronted on, I don't know, something that shows that there's a lack of faith in the community, and that, Pastor Skip in his message is going to say, some of you are going to fall away, because that's what happens. I mean, that's what apostasy is. How many are going to say, "Is it me? Pastor, do you see something in me that leads you to believe that I could be falling away, that I'm going off in the, wrong direction?" And that's what they're, saying. In fact, there may have even been a good chance that Judas was the one who probably sat there and said, "Well, I'm glad I'm not that one." Like that he may have been that. Were you going to say something, Dennis? You pulled the mic up to you.
Yeah.
Is your mic on?
I've done some reading on Judas, and not a whole lot.
Well, you were a sheriff, so you probably ran into a lot of Judases.
Yeah, exactly. But I was trying to figure out exactly what his motive was, but every time.
It doesn't come out of there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, go ahead.
But it seems like every time that he's spoken about, or something happens with money, there's Judas. And he's the one that.
Well, he's the one who carried the bag, so he was in charge of the money, and they must have been somewhat comfortable with him. Well, they're not going to give it to Matthew because he's the tax collector.
Matthew tested him several times.
Yeah.
Was angry with him at times, and how he thought the money should be used, but he thought it was a misuse of it. But there was Judas when he was talking about money, and is this all we have left? Is this all we have in our bag? Yes, that's all we have. And the Judas that they were looking for many of them. So I'm not sure exactly what his motive ultimately was. Got 30 pieces of silver, which isn't the whole.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that in a second, and because the motive really isn't that, that strange, Ray.
Well, the thing I keep thinking about is the fact that there's a lot of manipulating going on. Judas is doing it for his particular reasons. He gets 30 pieces.
Talk a little bit louder.
Well, Judas gets 30 pieces of silver out of the deal, and the Jews that are trying to crucify Jesus look at it as an opportunity to move their cause forward. And Jesus has got the whole plan that these people have to do this in order for me to be crucified and die and be resurrected. So there's a lot, from what I see, there's a lot of manipulation.
Yeah, well, the I don't know about the manipulation, because the manipulation is like, well, I know what's going to be, so I've got to move the pieces around. I think that Jesus just knows he's going to the, well, you got to remember, you got the human side. I can't even say the human side, but anyway, you got the fully God and the fully man side of Jesus, and a lot of Jesus's reactions we see are how he reacts as a man. We'll see next week when we talk about the garden, when he's in the garden saying, Lord, if there's any other way, Father, if there's any other way, let's do it that way. Even though he knew from before the foundations of the earth or the world that this was going to happen. Okay. And so Jesus and the Jews, the Jewish leaders are just the means that God uses to accomplish that. Just like he used the Babylonians to clean out the temple and to clean out Jerusalem and take the Jews, into captivity. It's not like they needed anything special to happen. Those are just the kind of people that they were. Nick,
Did Judas have a choice?
did he have what?
Did he have a choice?
It says, I think it says in Hebrews that he did it with joy, but no, it's for joy he did those things. I'd have to find it. I think it's Hebrews 12. In fact, let me see if I even have it in my notes. But I think in Hebrews 12 it says that he did it for joy.
Did he also like mock who he possessed? Because it kind of speaks like he said Satan entered into him. So that was
Well,
significant.
let me get to that. In Hebrews 12:2, it's my statement is, you probably have this on your notes. It says, it'd be on the back page, Jesus endured the cross for the joy set before him. And the verse is, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Again, what I've been saying the last couple of weeks, Jesus is never the victim.
Oh no, that's not like Judas.
Oh, Judas, I'm sorry.
No, Judas had a choice.
Yeah.
But what if he chose not to? Would that have thwarted like
Somebody else would have.
Okay.
Yes, probably somebody else would. We get confused because it says Jesus entered him. Jesus enters us all. I mean, Satan. Well, I'm getting my characters all mixed up today. Satan enters all of us with temptation, but we don't have to give in to the temptation. Joe.
Yeah, I was talking with Ray earlier and he had read the white paper. I had the white paper with my brother on Judas.
You had the what?
A white paper.
A white paper?
It's just
Mhm.
a discussionary paper, basically. And what it was putting forward was the concept that Judas was not a betrayer. He was an absolute zealot. And the purpose of bringing the soldiers and so forth to Christ was to force Christ to use his divine power to destroy them, to show that he was God and to destroy the Romans. And then when he didn't, Christ didn't, and he was crucified, Judas was so mortified, he committed suicide. And it's an interesting paper, but it's all speculation.
And that's the thing, that it's all Ray and I had a conversation this weekend about speculation. We were following up on the conversation about Theophilus on Friday, and just all this stuff, but it's all speculation. And so you can even get into the name of Judas. If he was a zealot, because people say, well, he must have been a zealot, but why wasn't he Judas the zealot like Simon was the zealot?
Right.
And so he wasn't nobody really knows what Iscariot means, because you gotta remember, nobody had last names. You had something that identified, Mary was from Magdala. Whatever the different things were. I had something I wanted to read, this book. What I do is I get books on PDFs and then I print them out. I put them on my tablet, but I print them out and then I have them spiral bound so that, when you want to work with it, you can lay nice and flat, big printing margins and all of that. And I'd mentioned this one when we were going through in the beginning, but I wanted to read you. She is Eugenia Scarvelis Constantinou. She's a professor. She's an Eastern Orthodox lady. Her husband's an Eastern Orthodox priest. And she used to teach she may even still, at the University of San Diego, which is a Roman Catholic, school. But she talks about the betrayal in her. I thought this was interesting. She says, she titles it "The Scandal of the Betrayal." She says the betrayal, let me make sure I'm close enough here. She says the betrayal of Christ by Judas, one of the 12, was scandalous. Both Jews and pagans pointed to the disloyalty of Judas as proof that Jesus was not who he claimed to be. Early enemies of the Christian faith suggested that Judas must have realized that Jesus was a fraud, which motivated him to betray his master. And thus, the betrayal of Jesus by one of his closest disciples was a source of some embarrassment for the first Christians, not to mention a terrible shock to the other disciples. This is one evidence, one proof that people use for the legitimacy of the New Testament, and that it includes all of these stories of people failing, of Peter's denial and, whatever you find in there, that people, when they're writing legends or just making up fiction about superheroes and never include their faults. But the Bible, David, the most powerful, the most beloved person in the land at that time. And here they bring up, his affair with, we'll call him an affair. That's always a nice word. His affair with Bathsheba. No, but, they bring that kind of stuff up in the middle. So he says the fathers of the church, this would be like the church fathers of the 2nd, 3rd century. The fathers of the church noted that because the Gospels include such unfavorable facts, we can have confidence that they are true and reliable. The Gospels are nothing like ancient mythologies that have no historical basis, and unlike ancient royal biographies penned by court-appointed historians, the Gospels do not portray everyone in the most positive light. Okay, it says Christians cannot comprehend anyone betraying the Lord for money. And there's this motive, is the money. But think how hard that is to think of somebody betraying God, especially somebody that's walking and talking and living with him. We can say, yeah, we're loyal followers of Christ, but we're 2,000 years removed, and depending on our situation, maybe that money, actually becomes something real. It says countless modern movies and books have proposed various rational explanations for Judas's actions. The only motive given in the Gospels is greed. And Judas approached the Jewish leaders. They did not recruit or entice him. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him to you?" And that's in Matthew 26. So we don't think about the scandal of, hang on a second, of the scandal of this betrayal. We just figure there's a bad guy doing bad things, and it puts Jesus on the cross. But think about, I was trying to think, what if you found out that somehow, this would have to be at the time, that somehow Billy Graham was betraying the flock, the Christian church. Here's somebody who, probably nobody in the 20th century more followed and revered than Billy Graham, and then you find out, you know, he was betraying. I can't even imagine, what it would be. But I mean, it would make you stop and think, and you go, wait a minute. If Billy Graham can do that, maybe I can do that, or maybe this Christian stuff isn't worth being involved in. So that's where you've got to place, Judas, Nick.
Yeah, so it said 30 pieces of silver, so it says the price of.
I'm sorry, say it again.
30 pieces of silver,
Uh-huh.
is it, and it's saying right below in Exodus, the price of a slave, fulfilling prophecy, so it's 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave?
Yeah, no, in fact, the verse is, if an ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned.
So is that a lot of money back then?
I doubt that it's $1 million. I mean, it's probably, see, and it is 30 shekels of silver or 30 pieces of silver back in Exodus, the same as it is in the first century time of Jesus. I think the main thing is, for our purposes, the main thing is that there was 30 pieces of money given. There was 30 pieces prophesied. There's 30 pieces, they're talked about in Exodus. It's prophesied about in Zechariah. And then we see it in actuality in,
Because I'm wondering, like, obviously Judas, like all his disciples for the most part were very familiar with the Old Testament. I mean, they were familiar with these prophecies.
oh yeah.
So did he have any self-awareness that he was asking for 30 pieces of silver and this is fulfilling?
I don't know. See, I don't know that he asked for 30 pieces of silver. He asked for, what are you going to give me? And they did it. See, they fall into their own traps. Yeah, by all of a sudden they do it, and then it backfires on them. I mean, that one day they're probably sitting around and go, while we were paying him off, I had something in the back of my head that said, maybe this isn't right, because I've heard this before. I just can't put my finger on the right scroll to go find out what it actually said. See, and so all these pieces are just kind of moving around. Nobody's controlling it except for the prophecies. And if it says that this prophecy will be fulfilled, you can take it to the bank that it's going to be fulfilled. And how people get moved around to the different ways. I mean, I don't think that they're, zombies walking around or robots or.
Then there's a question, it says right underneath it, what does this Christ say about how Jesus was valued by the religious leaders?
Yeah, that's supposed to be my question to
Is
you.
that kind of implying?
What's that?
I mean, by that question, it's almost implying that they kind of knew that, like, was he worthless? Like, by them paying that amount, were they
To them, he's worth the price of a slave.
okay. That's
Yeah, that's the thing. But see, that's their contempt for Jesus.
okay.
You can say what you want, you can draw the crowds that you want, but to us, you're no more valuable than a slave.
But then
Do your microphone. I can get it on the recording.
Then Judas regrets the fact that things have not turned out the way he planned. And he takes back the money, which, may have been instigated by greed, but then he takes the money and gives it back to him or throws it back into him. And then they don't even want it because,
and that's right. And that's the kicker on the prophecy part, or I shouldn't say on the prophecy part, but on the part that makes them realize that they're doing wrong. Because when he comes back and he throws it on the temple floor, now they're all, disgusted. How could you do that to our temple, to take blood money and throw it in our temple? And you think they'd rather say, wait, is that really blood money? We gave it to them. Yeah, so because again, this is going to show them their guilt,
It's also
and
like hardness of heart. Like,
pardon?
they harden their hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've just They've just blanked out through hatred. They've just, blanked out. So people, I think, I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna say. The hatred, where does that sound familiar? What we've been dealing with in our political world, and I'm not getting into
Yeah, no.
politics, but. The hatred of Trump and what it has done to blind and create things that normally would not have been, but because of the.
Well, even on the other side, the love of Trump blinds people. Yeah, I read somewhere, somebody was making a point, and they said, you gotta understand one thing about Trump. And you can't open a paper without reading something, 10 things. Anyway, is that people have to realize Trump is not the Antichrist. But then people need to understand that Trump isn't the Messiah. And so we get blinded both ways. And as Christians, that shouldn't affect us, that way. Because see, what happens is the hatred part's too easy. On the worship part of Trump, on that side, one day Christians are going to have to wake up and go, oh, wait a minute. I don't care what he does good or whatever. Wake up and they go, wait a minute, I've put my faith in the wrong person.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, it's fine that he does what I like or whatever, but I mean, I've gone overboard. And the same way on the hate, it's just, I guess I really don't hate him that much because I really don't know him, but I let the media get to me or, whatever it is. And it could be about anything.
But we tend to do that in relationships as well. I mean, just amongst our family, we can be like that. We'll raise somebody up in our family because they're our own family.
Right.
Cover up any bad that they do or overlook.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so that's where they're at. So when they, like you bring up about the 30 pieces, of silver, they thought they could buy their way into getting rid of Jesus. And that would have worked out great for them if he wasn't God. I mean, if he wasn't going to raise on the third day, if that got him on the cross and he's dead, buried, and you never hear from him again, that was money well spent on their part. But God doesn't let it work, that way. Anybody else? Good.
But they still continue with their plan. I mean, they put the money back, and they're gonna put it in some cemetery plot or whatever. But then the plan continues. We're gonna have this guy arrested.
Oh,
We're gonna bring him before the Sanhedrin.
Right, but they don't realize any of
At
that.
night,
Yeah.
which is violating their own law.
Well, people do strange things when you are misdirected. But see, when they got the money back and they go, oh, we can't have it in temple, that isn't them realizing we're doing wrong by Jesus. That maybe shows they make them recognize a little bit, maybe we're hypocrites. So we can't take this money, but we'll put it in a potter's field. But nobody on either side, recognizes any of it until Jesus rises from the dead. Nobody, the Jews don't, the disciples don't, none of them. That's why John, when he's writing his gospel and he wants to insert something that they already know the answer to, it's usually in brackets. I mean, not the editor's brackets, but his own brackets, because in I think it was in that John passage of the anointing, it says about Judas objecting to the money. I think it's brackets it and say the one who betrayed Jesus. Well, he knows that now, but he didn't know that when he was sitting with Jesus and Lazarus and all the people, and Mary brought the anointing oil. None of them realized that. They just figured. In fact, they were probably all agreeing with Judas that the money could have been better. Could have been better spent. So anyway, but back to the discussion question that Nick brought up. What does the price say about how Jesus was valued by the religious leaders? Shows that their contempt for Jesus And it also fulfills prophecy and exposes their blindness, which we talk. They don't know what they're doing. They're responsible for what they're doing. They just don't realize the consequence, and it reflects on the hypocrisy. So, and it contrasts with Jesus's real worth, that they don't. In other words, Judas probably could have got more money. So, number 2 on the sheet, Satan's role and Judas's responsibility. And this goes back to, I think maybe it was Nick that asked, did he have a choice? Yeah, Satan tempted him, and he fell for the temptation. It's called God's sovereignty and man's responsibility, and it works together because God's sovereign over all things. God knows, the Bible says all this. We can't deny it. We can't deny predestination, election. We can't deny that the scripture says, that God knows the beginning from the end and stuff, stuff like that. But then the Bible also talks about man's responsibility, and just the warning passages, where, for anyone that'll follow me, there's a choice. When Jesus is weeping over Jerusalem, 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 how I wanted that you would, whatever, but you, and, and you have the, we're finite. It's hard for us to understand. So is God sovereign and in control of everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is man responsible for everything that he does? Yeah, that's all you can say is you got 2 things that are kind of opposing, and all you can do is say amen to each of them, right?
Well, Jesus isn't hiding from either. That, after we go to the Passover meal, let's go down to Gethsemane, which we've done numerous times, so Judas knows exactly where he's heading to. I mean, he could have gone anywhere else and sought refuge, but he's not.
No, like I say, he's never the victim. He's the one who's, I said this, whether it was in, this Life of Christ thing or whatever, my point is the whole Bible is a stage. It's like a play. And there's only one actor, and that's Jesus. Everybody else may be extras, and they walk into the scene, do something, walk out of the scene. Most people are just background scenery, but in this play that unfolds, there's only one actor, and that's Jesus. And that's the thing here. So like I say, it's not a matter of, Jesus could have hid. Jesus didn't want to hide. I mean, it's like, because he hasn't done or said anything that should be considered wrong or not prophesied. If they knew the word, there's, I think it's in John one time where they ask, a woman's, been married 7 times, and they all died, little arsenic in the oatmeal in the morning. But anyway, they all died. But when it comes to the kingdom, whose wife is she going to be? And he said, well, one, there's no marriage in heaven, but you don't know this because you don't know the scriptures. He's saying if you knew the scriptures, you would know all this stuff. All this stuff would be clear, or at least clearer. But he puts it right there that they don't know their own scriptures. Okay. And this is the same thing with Judas. Judas, even whatever disappointed him about Jesus, he should have known that it was all going to work out on the end, and that he should want to be, on the winning side, if we can say it, that way. Remember in John chapter 6, after they fed the 5,000, and Jesus is, preaching to people, and they're all called disciples, the 5,000 people, they're all called disciples. And Jesus gives them hard sayings. I'm the bread of life. Whoever eats of me, and they're thinking, well, we can't eat blood and, this and all of that. And they all say, it's too hard of a teaching. And they all get up and they leave, except for the 12. Who's in that 12? Judas. He's one of the 12. He's standing strong. I mean, he could have said, you know what? This is a bunch of baloney. I'm out with these guys. And then the verse would have said, and then Jesus turned to the 11 who remained. But Judas is there. Yes. So Judas should have known, what was happening. But because he carried the bag and he was greedy, that set him off. That just made him Nick.
So when they said like it was too hard of a saying, was that like, it was like offending their like sensibilities? Or like,
To them, I think it was an offense to the law, because the law said that, one, you can't be a cannibal. And here he's saying, I'm the bread of life, and whoever eats me, yeah, and they weren't allowed to drink blood, let alone human blood. So again,
I would say even amongst Christians, there's other Christians that don't believe the word, like, don't believe that. Like as far as communion. As far like, because that was, I guess, one of the hard sayings was, like they were, it stumbled them that he was expressing that.
well, I mean, I think the main point is that they thought that he was going against the teaching of scriptures. You got to remember, these people had 1,500 years of, from Sinai until this incident, 1,500 years of growing up, knowing the law, or being taught the law, living by the law, knowing what was forbidden. Some know better than others as you get by time. Think back, what was 1,500 years ago from today? What was that? The year 500? Year 600? That's a long time ago. Think from that day, whatever was being taught, that we are the ancestors. No, ancestors, we're the descendants. Yeah, we're the descendants of that teaching, and we carry that down. We carry whatever it was in the 6th century that they were teaching. And then we get to today, and then someone comes along and says, you can't do that anymore. Someone comes along today and says, you know what? Baptism isn't right. It may have been okay for back then, but I have a new teaching for you, or communion. Yeah, and so that's what the Jews were listening. That's what the Jews were hearing from, we're hearing from Jesus when he says, but if he knew the book of Jeremiah and the book of Isaiah, and probably even in Daniel, they would have known we're waiting for times to change. Maybe this is it. Maybe now is that time. Like that. It's hard. The guilt is probably more on the Jewish leaders, because they're the ones who are supposed to teach people right. They're the ones where, Jesus comes along, Jesus does something or says something that makes them think, hey, he's claiming to be God. They should go to their rabbi and say, Rabbi Skip, I ran into this guy out here. He's got this big crowd, and he's saying this and this and this, because he is saying that it's written in the scriptures, but we don't know about it. What do you think? Pastor Skip would get on his phone, start Googling. No, no, but but the rabbi would go back, and this is why you had the different levels of rabbis. You had the Sanhedrin, and you had the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the lawyers. And that isn't lawyers like, hit and run lawyers. And all. Those were lawyers of the law who interpreted the law. And they're the ones who should have seen that and said, and there was a couple. Who was that? I don't know if it was Gamaliel or who, stood up in the Sanhedrin one day and said, if we better not do anything, because if what they're saying is true, then we need to know it and follow it. Or if what they're saying is false, the movement will die out.
And the average person, they weren't able to, like.
No, and they didn't have Bibles.
Yeah.
They didn't have Bibles. I mean, there may have been a set of scrolls in the temple, You would hope that there would, but you don't know.
but you couldn't just pop in and start reading. Like,
Mm-mm.
so you were dependent on the religious leaders to feed you. the-
Yeah, but most of them were dependent on the oral history that had come down over those 1,500 years, you know? And I've said, hang on just a second, Kurt. And I've said before, people used to memorize scriptures a lot better than we do today. They memorize whole, you know, portions of books. Kurt.
2 or 3 years ago,
Speak up a little bit louder.
2 or 3.
You don't need that.
Few years back, you had printed a sheet out that indicates that there were 7 different groups of religious groups.
Yeah,
Within the Jews, plus scribes, chief priests, and elders. So it's pretty easy to see that there would have been a conflict at this particular time, because most of those people was probably, or parts of those groups was probably there. And they would have a tough time. That would be like putting Catholics, Lutherans, and.
yeah, Baptist. Hey, well, right. Right. But you gotta remember one thing that we're talking about here is location. You're in Jerusalem, you're in one place, you know? And it is the place that has the temple that has probably most of the authority and whatever, you know, is involved. You know, it would be a lot easier to solve differences between Christian denominations right here in town in Havasu, because I think we have just about everybody represented here in town. I mean, if we wanted to, if we said, you know what, there is a big conflict, we're going to have a big meeting. We're going to meet at the Aquatic Center, you know, and everybody send a couple of representatives. And here's the topics that we're going to discuss. Oh, wait, that's the Council of Nicaea. Yeah, but they had to come from further distances to get there, and they didn't have cars. They couldn't call Uber. But that's what they had to do, was they had these councils to decide. In Acts chapter 15, you know, Peter and Paul ended up in Gentile areas, and they're preaching the gospel and they're doing all this stuff. And Christianity is still pretty Jewish at that time. And so it becomes a matter of how much of this Jewish stuff do we have to do? Do the Gentiles have to become Jews first to become Christians? That actually was what the question was, because the Judaizers, those who had come from James and Jerusalem, you can read it in Acts 15, anyway, said, no, these people have to become Jews first. You can't, you know, you can't be unwashed. Anyway, so they went back to Jerusalem. They sent a group back to Jerusalem. They came before James, you know, and they said, hey, you know, do they have to become Jews first? And at that council, they decided, well, look, no, they don't have to become Jews. Just tell them they have to follow these 5 or 6 things. You know, one of them was no drinking of blood, and I don't remember all the, you know, all the others. But anyway, but they just those things, and they're, you know, and they're good. Like that. So to what you're saying, you know, Kurt, is, yeah, there was different groups, but they all probably believe kind of the same thing. They may not like the other group. That was just because they probably didn't like their power plays or.
So is that still binding today, no drinking blood?
I think because you're thinking about communion, right?
No, I'm saying about there's cultures that they put.
Oh, but yeah, right. But all those laws were to the Jews and the Jews only.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no. All those laws that you see, all the like ceremonial laws.
'Cause I remember there's a story about the sheep coming down with the pig on it.
Right.
And he kind of said, hey, you can eat what you want.
Yeah, that's like Acts 10. Yeah, that's in Acts 10. But yeah, and that's God declaring all foods clean.
It's just like
Right.
blood sausages people eat. I was just.
Well, no, well, but that's what it is, you know, but see, Peter kind of believed it, but you know, that was in Acts 10. But if you read what happens going into Acts 15, when he sees the Jews come from Jerusalem, the Jewish Christians come from Jerusalem, he separates himself from eating with the Gentiles. Well, wait a minute, what happened to that experience in chapter 10 of the sheet in the vision, the sheet coming down with all the foods, and God says, don't call unclean what I call clean.
Yeah.
Now, so it held for a while he went in to go to Cornelius's house, who was a Gentile, and because that's what the vision was for.
Yeah.
You know, don't call these people unclean because I call them clean. But then later on, but he's back to the same old thing.
I know it speaks about like personal conscience. I don't know exactly where, but if something causes me, like, if something I do offends my brother, I will like set it aside.
It's your weaker, for your weaker brother.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
I think that could mean like that too, like, not that you're being manipulative or deceptive, but you can kind of discern your behavior.
Yeah, but even that, it's hard to pull that up there, and we're gonna have to end this session. It's kind of hard to pull that up into today, because that whole thing where Paul speaks about, you know, to not offend the weaker brother. But see, that was over meat coming out of these pagan temples, because all the sacrifices that went on, even in the temple and the tabernacles and all that, ended up in the butcher shop, you know, and people ate it. It wasn't like, you know, it was just used for the sacrificial, you know, purposes. So what are you saying? So you got these Christians who live in these pagan towns like Ephesus, and they got, you know, all these wicked temples to Diana and, you know, whoever. And what about the meat that is sacrificed to their gods that ends up in the butcher shop where I buy my meat?
My worship.
Can I eat that if it was sacrificed to idol? And what Paul's saying is that doesn't count for anything. You can eat it, but he says, but you have to abstain if someone else is going to have a problem. You know, your buddy has a problem going, how can you eat that? You know, how can you eat that? That came out of their temple, and you go, you know what? For the sake of my brother's conscience, even though I don't have that conscience, but for the sake of my brother's conscience, I won't eat it, you know. So, you know, when I used to work for Carl's Jr., and I used to go around to all the stores and all that. But I remember one time there was this guy, he was from India, and he was manager of one of our stores. And you know me, I'm kind of a wise guy. So, no, and I said to him, I go, you know, how is it that you can work here and serve up these cows? Aren't they your relatives? And without missing a beat, he says, no, they're your relatives. You know? Anyway, so okay, Ray and then we'll finish up unless his comment causes 10 more questions.
Well, the one thing that I'll pick up on too is the fact that Judas felt pretty safe in going to the high priest. It's not like the high priest had an ad out there, hey, look,
No,
we're waiting to get rid of Jesus, come and see us.
He went voluntarily, you know, to them. They probably never thought about it like that. He brought it up to, that's what makes his betrayal so wicked. You know, like I said, yeah, if he was reading a want ad, you know, in the Jerusalem Daily that said, looking for a way to capture Jesus secretly, you know, call 1-800-555-6612, you know, and do it that way. And it's not. Well, we'll finish up next week with the betrayal, and then we'll move it right into the, you know, into the garden and the arrest. So it just puts us, were you gonna say something, Dave?
Oh, I just got a question. Seventh-day Adventists,
Uh-huh.
they don't eat pork because they consider it unclean.
They don't eat meat.
Well, they eat beef.
They don't. They're not supposed to. They're meatless people. Now, Whether they still, I know that you were in Riverside, you know, Loma Linda was there and Loma Linda College and all, and that was you go to any of the grocery stores right in that neighborhood, there ain't no meat, you know,
Not even in the hospital.
right? Yeah, you know, because there was Seventh Adventist University and Medical Center, you know, there, so. Now, what they do here and what we do, you know, you know. I mean, they're no different than us. I mean, they probably don't follow their rules any better than we follow, you know, our rules. We make exceptions for ourselves on what rules we'll say, well, that was for them back then, but that's not, you know, for us, you know, for us now. So anything else? Anybody got anything else? We'll finish it up next week.